The Long Con. The hour was growing late, and below in the distant grand ballroom, she could hear the last of the revelers being ushered out by the castle's beleaguered staff. Her beleaguered staff. She repressed the urge to giggle at the thought and forced a serious expression back on her face. There would be plenty of time for laughter later. Years of laughter, and years of celebration. Years of equality. But first, there were things that needed to be taken care of, chief among them, the final confrontation. The door before her was the portal of the culmination of her every action for the last few years. Literal years of work had led to this moment. Innumerable machinations, countless hours of preparation and work, and all of it had been leading to this one moment. This, her crowning moment of triumph. With as serious as an expression as she could muster, she pushed open the door to the guest room and looked upon its sole occupant. There, resting comfortably on the room's sole four-poster bed, lay the former Princess of Friendship. Her eyes were closed in concentration, her wings folded down across her back. She didn't do so much as twitch as her former student and friend entered the room and shut the door behind her.
I trust the accommodations are to your liking?
Twilight Sparkle said nothing. Starlight Glimmer cleared her throat and she started towards the bed.
If there's another room in the castle that you prefer, I can easily arrange for...
Twilight sprang. Her attack was silent, her teeth bared in fury and her eyes wide with rage and blazing with vengeance. Starlight's magic caught her easily and froze her mere inches from her intended victim. She smirked into the infuriated face of her former teacher.
So quickly that you resort to brute force.
She made a show of rotating the violet alicorn a full 360 degrees as she floated her back to the bed. Her smirk widened as she took in the plain black equal sign that now emblazoned the mare's flanks.
Are you really so lost without your magic? Put me down.
Twilight growled with as much authority as she could muster while being flipped upside down.
If I do, are you gonna try attacking me again?
Twilight glared at the unicorn when next their eyes met.
What do you want? Why are you here? Well, I just want to talk. I've got nothing to say to you. Oh, no. You misunderstand. I want to talk to you. You don't have to say anything. I just need you to listen.
She set the alicorn back onto the bed, but did not release her magical hold.
The question is this. Can you listen to your own volition, or do I need to restrain you?
Twilight chewed on her cheek for a moment before closing her eyes and exhaling.
I'll listen. Good, but warning.
The magic faded and the unicorn saw her former teacher's muscles bunch for a second attack.
Lunge again, and I'll take your wings.
Twilight stalled.
Even you aren't powerful enough to undo the magic that made me an alicorn.
Starlight cocked her head.
No, but I am more than powerful enough to pull them off.
Twilight gaped.
You wouldn't.
Starlight smiled sweetly.
Even after everything I've done, you really don't think I'll just add a few drops of blood to my thus far bloodless revolution?
Twilight took a long moment to consider, then finally slumped in defeat.
I just don't understand.
She looked across the room at the mare that she had chosen as her pupil, taking in her new regalia. The golden shoes on her hooves, the crimson cape about her shoulders, and the peaked shining crown on her head.
Why, Starlight, you were a different mare than you used to be. You changed.
Starlight's smile grew even wider.
Oh, Twilight, that's your first misconception about all of this. I never changed.
She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat on it, groaning in ecstasy at finally being off her hooves.
Sorry, but it seems like every lord and baron in Equestria wanted to dance with a new princess of equality. I meant to come see you hours ago.
She kicked off the golden shoes and rubbed her aching hooves.
So, let's get back to a few years, shall we? To when you convinced me that my temporal manipulations would eventually lead to Equestria's destruction. You were correct in that regard, at least, and I was so blinded by my own drive for vengeance against you that I very nearly lost sight of my own goals. I can still remember the fear that I felt as you and the others deliberated on my fate. So how could I escape from Tartarus, I wondered. Exactly how many dungeon cells does Canterlot Mountain actually hold?
She cut her eyes at her prisoner.
There are 17 levels of dungeons, by the way. I have already had about half of them filled.
When Twilight didn't respond, Starlight continued.
So when you came out and decreed that I would be your pupil in the study of friendship, well, I was knocked clean over. This is my chance, I remembered thinking. Your chance at redemption?
Twilight muttered.
No, silly.
Starlight giggled.
My chance to succeed when I'd failed in our town. I knew it might take years, but if I worked slowly enough and carefully enough, I could amass the power I would need to bring equality to Equestria.
Her hooves sated for the moment, and Starlight sank back into her chair and sighed.
The first step was the simplest. As your student, I needed to learn everything I could about the magic of friendship. I really was a devoted student, Twilight. You had to believe that. And you were a wonderful teacher.
Twilight's head sunk at the praise.
Really, none of this would have been possible without your lessons that you taught me.
Twilight raised her eyes and glared.
I taught you about honesty, responsibility, and restraint.
Starlight raised an eyebrow.
You also gave me access to books and tomes where I could learn spells like mental manipulation, which really was the key to all of this. You also showed a remarkable susceptibility to manipulation yourself.
She snickered.
You fell for that illusion I cast on the cutie map so quickly, so you practically gift-wrapped the princesses for me. I needed to test my cutie mark removal spell on ponies of their power level, and I knew that if they could be nullified, then any pony could.
Twilight's muzzle had dropped so low it was practically buried in the blanket upon which she lay.
So, the next step was establishing alliances with those who would be of use to me. Oh, did I say alliances? I meant friendships.
She began to tap her hooves as she counted them.
Discord was the big win, of course. He might be an irritating canker sore, but it was easy enough to figure out one of his weaknesses. Fluttershy,
Twilight muttered.
Bingo.
Starlight chirped happily.
Thorax and Pharynx were also big gets. I mean, being friends with the de facto rulers of an entire changeling race? I could have seized power back then if my magic would work on their species. And then there was Maud, of course.
Starlight's smirk returned.
Would it break your heart to know that she knew about this from the start? Appropriate, as she was the one who guided me to the caverns that started us off on this grand adventure. That mare can really keep a secret. Oh, and do you know the only thing wanted in exchange for her silence and cooperation? Pinky's safety.
Starlight snorted.
Good guess. As though I would never harm the mare. Come to think of it, you also actually solved one of my bigger issues. I mean, how was I supposed to know that befriending my childhood playmate would actually give myself the in I needed in the Crystal Empire?
Twilight started to realize that she did not know the fates of her family in the distant north.
They're fine, Twilight. Relax.
Starlight stretched and cleared her throat.
Goodness, I've barely started and I'm already parched. Are you thirsty?
Twilight said nothing.
Well, I'm thirsty.
She levitated over a nearby bell and rang it.
This one's yours, by the way.
She floated the bell closer so Twilight could inspect it.
It rings directly for your new maid. I picked her out just for you. You left out Trixie.
Starlight's mouth snapped shut.
What? When you were talking about your allies, you left out Trixie.
Starlight's smile was smaller this time.
Well, I didn't need to manipulate her. Of course you didn't.
Twilight rolled her eyes and glanced at the clock on the wall, as though she was bored.
I knew the two of you getting together would turn out badly in the end.
She offered a sympathetic look.
That's why I fought so hard against the two of you at first. Well, your disapproval only made our bond stronger, Twilight. You could never fathom the depth of our feelings for one another. She was over the proverbial moon when I told her of my plans, not to mention how she made it all so much easier. She's quite the talented spellcaster in her own right, you know.
Starlight sighed.
She'll make a fine royal consort, and...
She cut her eyes at her lover's former arch-foe.
Maybe I'll make a princess of her one day.
A knock came from the door before Twilight could reply.
"Oh, here's your new maid now. You may enter."
The door opened to admit a statuesque white mare bearing a tray with a crystal pitcher and glasses on one outstretched hoof. It wobbled slightly as if the maid was unfamiliar with lifting anything manually. Despite her height, she looked remarkably smaller than either of the mares was used to seeing her, an illusion probably brought on by the lack of her usual royal regalia. She stood still as a statue, a blank smile on her face, as Starlight filled a glass with water and took a sip.
"More refreshing. You may go now."
Equestria's new ruler waved a hoof to dismiss the old. With a slight bow, the maid turned and left the way she'd come, her still and straight tail momentarily brushing over the new equal sign on her flank. When the door was once again closed, Starlight took another sip of her water as she relished the shocked look on Twilight's face.
"What? You don't approve? I would have offered you Luna, but Trixie's always been a fan, and... What have you done?"
Twilight very nearly shrieked, barely managing to not attempt another flying tackle from the bed.
"Celestia and Luna control the sun and the moon. Without their magic, we're... doomed?"
Starlight took another sip and smacked her lips.
Goodness, however did ponies survive before them? If only there was a caste of ponies whose entire original purpose was to do exactly what they do.
Starlight finished her water and smiled.
"It's right there in the story of hearth-swarming, Twilight. It may take a few of us, but unicorns can raise and lower the celestial bodies. The spell's not even that complicated."
Twilight's face was everything she dreamed and more.
"I told you, I've been planning this for a very long time. I considered and planned for every possible situation."
Starlight floated her glass to a nearby table and sank deeper into her chair.
"Now, as I said before, changelings seem to be immune to my customized variation of the Fudicia Compellus spell. I admit, I was at a bit of a loss. At least until I discovered what strong friendship Spike had forged with the leaders of Equestria's two greatest threats, the changelings and the dragons. That turned out to be the last key in my little scheme, so the basic pieces were all in place. Now, I just needed to bide my time and wait for the perfect moment in which to strike."
She giggled.
"And then, you went and just made things even easier."
She recovered quickly and composed herself.
I mean, seriously, putting someone with my history in charge of so many young minds that are easier to manipulate and mold than most adults, didn't it cross your mind even once that perhaps putting a pony that someone would have called a cult leader in place as a guidance counselor might be a poor choice?
Twilight opened her mouth to rebut, but finally just turned away.
I thought you changed."